Welcome, everyone, to the Corintru Center for Baha'i History. The center was established by the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States in January 2024, just a little over a year ago. Its purpose is to foster the study of Baha'i history, Baha'i sacred texts, Baha'i philosophical and theological concepts, and world religions from a Baha'i and comparative perspective. I'm Robert Stockman, the director of the center, and joining me today is Ted Brownstein, who lives in Lake Worth, Florida, with his wife, Chris. He holds a master's degree in biblical Hebrew from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. He teaches various seminars and courses on Christian, Muslim, and Baha'i topics at Magdalene Carney Baha'i Institute, and has developed and taught courses for the Wilmot Institute on Judaism, Christianity, and the Bible. He was the co-founder of the Lake Worth Interfaith Network in 2005 and currently serves on its board of directors and as treasurer. He's also served as an ambassador for the Parliament of the World Religions 2015 to 2021, and he's the author of 4 books. Today, he's going to be giving us a fascinating presentation about race unity in the Torah defined in a very wide way, as we will see. And we are offering this partly as the Corintru Center's contribution to Black History Month, and it fulfills our mandate in various ways because we'll be talking about not only philosophical and theological concepts, but also world religions from a Baha'i and comparative perspective. So with that introduction, I will now turn it over to Ted. Ted, we're so happy that you've been able to join us. Welcome very much. I'm now adding your PowerPoint here to the stage so we can now see your PowerPoint, and I will now turn off my camera and microphone and turn it all over to you. Thank you very much. It's all yours.
Well, thank you, Dr. Stockman. It's a delight to be here today for this program on race unity and Torah. It's certainly appropriate that Black History Month started just yesterday, and we have the topic that is dear to Baha'is' hearts of race unity. And it's interesting at the juxtaposition of the oneness of humanity and the oneness of religion. We can see the textual basis for race unity in all of the world's religious scripture. We're going to look today specifically at the Torah, at Jewish scripture, and give you some insights, hopefully, that you'll find interesting and maybe useful in your own conversations with people. The picture on the cover here is a fascinating story. There's a Jewish group called B'Kol Lashon, which means in all languages. And there are people of all races of humanity who are Jews and who are associated together in this union. And so here you see a picture of youth from B'Kol Lashon studying from the Torah scroll. This presentation is designed especially for Black History Month, and it's been given in several churches and synagogues in the Lake Worth, Florida area. There's a campaign of 28 days of anti-racism for the month of February that's ongoing and just started. Talk more about that in a little bit. So let's start with the definition of what Torah is. And we're going to take a few minutes to look at a survey of Jewish holy literature that will be the source of the quotes that we'll be discussing on race unity. So strictly speaking, the Torah is the Hebrew name for the first 5 books of the Bible, the 5 books of Moses. You might know these names in English that are more derived from the Greek and Latin, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And they are often referred to as the Pentateuch, meaning referring to the 5 books that make up the 5 books of Moses in the Pentateuch. So the scrolls are actually handwritten, they're not printed, and a copyist will spend a year or 2 copying the entire Torah scroll, so they tend to be kind of expensive. On the left-hand side, there is a picture of someone holding up a Torah on the 2 spindles at the Kotel in Jerusalem, is Judaism's most holy site. So the Torah scroll in the synagogue is handled with great reverence. The scrolls are dressed with a covering over them. You can see that picture in the upper right. Often there are silver crowns that are put on The Torah is personified as a woman in that way. To the left there, the two young men holding the Torah scroll are proudly my grandsons, who just had their bar mitzvah last summer, and there is Lev and Zach holding the Torah scroll. And in the lower picture is someone reading from the Torah scroll from the bima, from the podium during services. So traditionally, Torah is accepted as the holy text of the Jewish faith, and this particular prayer is said before studying Torah. So I'd like to share it with you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotanu v'tzivanu le'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who hallows us with his blessings and commands us to, hear the critical words, engage with words of Torah. So the study of Torah is a sacred act in Judaism, well, just as it is in the Bahá'í Faith or other Abrahamic faiths, where the written text is valued and studied. The Torah is derived from a root word which simply means to teach or to give instruction. And so it is applied to the 5 books of Moses in a narrow sense, but it can also refer to the entire Hebrew Bible, which is known by the acronym Tanakh. Tanakh refers to the 3 main sections of the Hebrew Bible: the Torah, the Navi'im, which is the prophets, and the Ketuvim, which are other writings, such as the Psalms, Proverbs, and Song of Songs, which we'll be talking about a little later. So the word Torah is often used in the vernacular, even to refer to somebody's cherished or holy teachings that they may share. To share your Torah means to share like your interpretation of holy texts or of holy things. So just briefly, the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, is accepted in the Christian scripture. It's listed again in these 3 categories in the Gospels: the Law of Moses, the Prophets, and the Psalms. It's also acknowledged in the Quran as confirming the law that came down before it, and it's grouped the Torah and Injil, the Torah and Gospel, are grouped in the Quran as sacred scriptures, which are affirmed in the Holy Quran. Of course, the Bahá'í Writings affirm all of these holy books: the Pentateuch, the Gospel of Jesus, the message of found in the Quran, in the Bayan, the Book of the Bab, and in Baha'u'llah's writings. So these are all referred to as cities that convey the Word of God. Now here's a library picture of the Talmud. We're going to look at some of the extra biblical Jewish commentary, which we will be quoting from later. The Talmud is in 2 versions, one written in Babylon, this is a larger one, and in Jerusalem, there's a shorter one, but this large one can encompass 28 volumes. It's voluminous, and scholars spend a lifetime studying these texts, which are commentaries and interpretations on the scriptures. One of the things that's most interesting and unique about the Jewish method of studying is in the yeshiva, 2 students will sit across from each other at a table. Maybe you've seen this in movies like Yentl, and they basically discuss the meaning of the text and argue about it, and having a forceful argument and formulating evidence to prove your case from the text is considered a great honor. Also, the Talmud itself includes various viewpoints on interpretation. So a Rabbi Yahona will give a commentary, and Rabbi Hillel will give another. The 2 are set opposed to each other, not necessarily coming to the same conclusion, and the text itself doesn't tell you what to believe, to think one way or the other. They're viewed as open discussions in many cases. The Talmud came into existence after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. The rabbis went north to Galilee after the Roman conquest of Jerusalem, and the Talmud appeared gradually over the next 4 or 5 centuries. Another immense body of literature is the Midrash, which is commentary on the Torah. There's a Midrash for Genesis, a Midrash for Exodus, and so forth for each of the books. These are largely non-biblical stories that are told to embellish the stories. So the story of Abraham is told that his father Terah was an idolater and had a shop of idols, and one night the idols supposedly came to life and smashed each other. And Abraham was a iconoclast who was against idolatry, and so this story goes to illustrate Abraham's opposition to his father Terah's idolatry. And these stories are basically folklorical, and they're embellished stories, knowingly embellished, if you will. And so they're not considered on a par with the sacred text, but they're often used to enlighten it. So now we're going to turn our attention to the subject of race unity. And the race unity will start with the creation narrative. Everyone's familiar with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In that context is discussed the creation of humanity, from which all the races of mankind derive. So the first verse to mention the creation of mankind simply says that God created mankind in the divine image, in his image, male and female, he created them. So the idea of creation being noble, being made in the image of God, is something that certainly is familiar to Baha'is and forms the basis for race unity. Then we're told in the second chapter of Genesis that describes the creation of Adam from the dust of the ground, and that God formed a man into a shape and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living soul, or as this humanity says, a living entity. So then the Torah goes on to describe the proliferation of humanity from Adam and Eve to all of mankind through Noah, and only Noah and his family survived the flood, but then Noah had 3 sons, and all the nations are described in Genesis as deriving out of the sons of Noah. So these genealogies are found in Genesis chapters 5 and 10, and there's some names in there that you might find familiar, like Methuselah, and many names that you probably wouldn't recognize, and also the identity of the ancient nations that were in this catalog, some of which you would probably identify and some of you wouldn't. But the text itself says that from Noah's sons, all the nations of the earth spread out. So seeing mankind's common origin in the Adam and Eve story. So what's the significance for all mankind having been created, in a common lineage and in the image of God? What spiritual lessons can we draw from these stories? So first, to set a little context, as Baha'is, we all are familiar with the concept of these being non-literal stories, of there being metaphor and allegory. In some answered questions, for example, Abdul Baha gives us a point-by-point analogy, an allegory of what the meaning of Adam and Eve in the garden and the snake and all these things represent. They're understood to represent spiritual principles, and I like to view them as Jungian archetypes. In other words, they're concepts that all of humanity shares in their subconscious processes. They describe principles of reality that reflect our world, but not necessarily historical events. Sometimes in the Baha'i context and also in Islamic mystical contexts, these stories are referred to as pre-existence. That is, they are as though they occurred outside of time in a metaphysical world, not in the physical world that we know around us. And of course, the modern science has substantiated the oneness of humanity, showing that 99% of our DNA is shared, and there's really no genetic basis for race. Race is skin color and other features that what are considered racial features are simply physical characteristics that vary across the human population. And notably, there's more genetic variation within each race than there is identifying marks between the races. So our first quote from the extra biblical sources from the Talmud here, the statement is, it is taught that Rabbi Meir would say, the dust that served to form Adam, the first man, was gathered from the entire world. Now, this is really an interesting detail. In Genesis, it doesn't say where the dust came from. It just says that God took the dust and formed it into a man and breathed into his nostrils. But here, a universalist spin is given on the creation of Adam, that the dust that formed Adam was gathered from all the four corners of the world. Why did dust come from the entire world? Well, they give a really interesting analogy here, and I like this picture of the different dusts on the right there to kind of picture what the dust that were gathered might have looked like. But the question is asked in the Talmud, why did God gather man's dust from the four corners of the world? Thus spoke the Holy One, blessed be he. If a man should come from east or west, or from the west to the east, and his time comes to depart from this world, in other words, the time comes for him to die, then the earth shall not say, the dust of thy body is not mine, return to the place where you were created. So all the earth, all the dust, is considered as one home for mankind, and then the person is buried there, they're at home, so to speak. There are no foreign countries or distant places where people don't belong. Another quote from this time from Midrash that speaks about the four colors. God began gathering the soil to make the first human from the four corners of the earth, red, black, white, and yellow. Red is the blood, black is the internal organs, white is the bones and sinews, yellow is the external body. So here another sense of unity that all people share inside their bodies, various organs having various colors. And again, this quote from the Talmud, which interestingly enough is cited in the Quran. And in the Quran, it says that God told the children of Israel and then quotes the Talmud. So it's really interesting the way the Quran affirms not only Jewish scripture, Torah, but also the later works of the rabbis. And in this quote from the Sanhedrin section of the Talmud, it says, therefore man was created single in the world, to teach that for anybody who destroys a single life, it is counted as if he destroyed the entire world. And for anybody who preserves a single life, it is counted as if he preserved an entire world. And to be the cause of peace among men, that nobody should say to another, my forefathers are greater than yours. May we live up to this wonderful sentiment. If we all lived by this, the world would be a much more peaceful and glorious place. A couple other quotes from Talmud speaking about the image of God this time. And this serves, that is the image of God, to tell of the greatness of the Holy One, blessed be he, as when a person stamps out several coins within one seal, they are all similar to each other. And here we have a picture of the head of Caesar on an ancient coin. And it's interesting that this particular quote highlights the similarities between humans all being in the image of God. The next quote gives you a little different perspective. But the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, that is God, the Creator, blessed be he, stamped all people with the seal of Adam, the first man, as all are his offspring, and not one of them is similar to another. So again, it uses the differentiation, the differences in human appearance as a glory to God, as a sign of the power of God to do this marvelous thing. Okay, now we're going to turn our attention to some sources that unfortunately are found that are misused, that are Torah verses that traditionally have been used, especially in America, to justify racism, slavery, and Jim Crow. And we're going to dissect a couple of verses, key verses that have been used in that way. You may have heard of these things or seen other people espouse these viewpoints. So they're well documented in some of the literature that was justifying American slavery, and they try to depict the inferiority of the African peoples from the biblical text, which they fail to do, in my view. We'll look at the evidence and you can judge for yourself. So according to the biblical narrative, again, remember we're dealing in this kind of mythic, metaphysical world. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were three: Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They're named. And Ham being the father of Canaan. So Canaan was an individual who was the grandson of Noah, according to the text. And from these sons of Noah, the whole world branched out. And so they're generally seen as going to the three continents of the old world: the Japhethites to Europe, the Semites or Shemites to Asia, including the Middle East, and the Hamites to Africa. I wish I could see you to see if this is all connecting, but hopefully we'll have a chance to talk after the discussion. So Ham, in turn, had four sons who became family heads and nations. Cush, it was an ancient name for Ethiopia. And Canaan, of course, was the inhabitants of the Holy Land. It was known as the land of Canaan. And they were both sons of Noah's son, Ham. Canaan is listed as the youngest of Ham's sons. And so the story is told in Genesis that after the flood, that Noah planted a vineyard and he drank wine and became drunk. And he was naked within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. So there was an embarrassing family incident where the father was drunk and the sons saw him. So Shem and Japheth took a cloth and placed it against their backs, and walking backward, they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way, so they did not see their father's nakedness. So according to the story, two of the sons protected their father from further embarrassment. So Noah woke up from his drunken sleep, and he learned what his youngest son had done to him. But note what he said. He said, "Cursed be Canaan, he shall be the lowest of slaves to his brother." So note that the text doesn't say that the son Ham was the one who was cursed. It only mentions Canaan as the youngest one, the youngest grandson. So now moving forward in the biblical narrative to the time after the flood, to the time of Abraham, the Holy Land was being promised to Abraham in this well-known text. And here God tells Abraham that your offspring, the children of Abraham, would become strangers in a land not theirs, which proved to be Egypt. And that's this story is told in Exodus, the second book of Moses. And they were enslaved there and oppressed for 400 years. But I shall execute judgment on the nations, on Egypt, and in the end they will go free with great wealth. And then it goes on to say, as you shall go to your ancestors in peace, that is, Abraham would pass away, and you will be buried at a ripe old age, and they, your descendants, shall return here in the fourth generation. And it says, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So this foreshadows the conquest of Canaan. The Amorites were one of the 7 nations, the principal nation that inhabited the Holy Land at that time. And we're told here that there was some iniquity that they were being chastised for, and they were going to be driven out of the land for this. So we see that the basis was not a racial basis, or wasn't wasn't based on their descendancy, but it was their punishment, divine punishment, was attributed to their own conduct, their iniquity. So then, in the biblical story of the conquest, Joshua leads the Israelites into conquering the promised land, and many are slain. And this has been seen, and I think most of us would probably agree, as something that is against modern standards, our standards. It doesn't seem right to kill people indiscriminately because of where they live to conquer a land. But we understand, like in the Garden of Eden stories and the Noah stories, that these stories are not literal, they're not historical. The mass slaughter that's described didn't take place by any historical account. There are no archaeological or historical records to report that, but it's intended to teach spiritual lessons. They're given to teach spiritual lessons. And so this war against the Canaanites might be used as a spiritual death of a loss of connection to God that came from the iniquity of the Amorites. Some of their faith-based practices were contrary to our ethics, to biblical ethics, and to the teachings of the Talmud. So even in this context, though, the killing of the Canaanites wasn't indiscriminate. The righteous were saved out of the population. And so the family of Rahab there is one example. There were other cases of Gibeonites and other groups that are recorded in the Torah as having been saved. And every story of divine judgment that we have in the Old Testament or in the Torah, we have these exceptions of righteous ones being saved, whether it's Lot and his daughters out of Sodom and Gomorrah, Noah from the flood, etc. So specifically, what were the Canaanite iniquities? They did practice child sacrifice, and there are reports, descriptions of a gold idol that would have pivoting arms that would sling a baby into its mouth, and they would sacrifice their children ritually. This is, of course, echoed in the story of Abraham offering up Isaac. And in that story, of course, the hand of God stops Abraham from slaughtering Isaac, and there is no child sacrifice ever acceptable to the people of God that's reported in the Torah. Also, there were fertility rites, fertility polls are reported, and there was sacred prostitution. That was a practice of the Canaanites, and this has been corroborated from records, archaeological records in the north and what's modern day Lebanon, and Ugaritic texts that tell on clay tablets of the practices of the people at that time, and the idea that a woman would go and prostitute herself in order to have the land and their animals be fertile is something that's documented in those texts. So these might be the iniquities of the Amorites that are being referred to. So in summary, the curse in Genesis chapter 9 is not cast on all of Ham's descendants, nor specifically on Cush, who was the black skin, the Ethiopian, but only on Canaan. And this seems to be in anticipation of the mandate to conquer the Holy Land. It's no generalized curse upon black-skinned people, as white supremacists have often asserted. Okay. Now we're going to turn our attention to a second example of a text that has been similarly misused, this time from the biblical Song of Songs, or Shir HaShirim. It's a short book made up of about 7 chapters of love poems. It celebrates the love of a young girl called the Shulamite from the boy in very poetic terms. It's also sometimes known as the Song of Solomon or Canticles in Catholic Bibles. The girl is called the Shulamite Maiden, and there's the verse that we're going to focus on because of its implications for race. Has to do with her description of herself. She says, "I am dark but comely." The King James Bible translates black but beautiful. And in fact, the word in the Hebrew is shahor, is black. And she says, look not upon me because I am swarthy. Well, what's going on here? Was she embarrassed by her dark complexion? As we said, these verses have been used by some white supremacists to disparage dark skin in their various publications. So we're going to take a look at this. A personal story how this question came up. I was working at our local Baha'i retreat center at Meg Carney Baha'i Institute in West Palm Beach with a friend who is African American who asked me this question: why does the Bible speak about black but beautiful? And I thought to myself, I wonder about that. I need to look back at the Hebrew text, and I have some background in Hebrew. I was able to actually go on my phone and read there and see what the text actually said. And the text has the word and, not the word but. That's what's in red here. That long, skinny letter is a vav. In Hebrew, it's used connecting to words to mean and. It's used very frequently in the Bible. And it universally means and. There's no reason in the text to translate this as but. So it is a mistranslation. Further, if we read the context of the following verse, it's interesting that the blackness of the Shulamite is celebrated. It says that she was like the tents of Kedar, which was a tribe in the desert in ancient times and what's now the Negev in northern Arabia, that was famous for their black tents, which are pictured here still in modern times, also compared to the pavilions of Solomon. So the girl being dark-skinned here is not at all used as a negative or a pejorative in the poetic context. So why was it misinterpreted? Well, there are some hints in the text that have led people to this misinterpretation. The girl says, don't stare at me because I'm swarthy, because the sun has gazed upon me. My brother's sons quarreled with me, and they made me guard the vineyards. So this maiden had a suntan. So the allusion to her swarthy skin has nothing at all to do with race. She, of course, was the same race as her brothers and other people around her. But she was laboring. She was doing agricultural work, guarding the vineyard from foxes and other beasts that would interfere with the crop. And apparently her companions may have looked down on her for being of the working class and not sitting safe from the sun and avoiding a suntan like they were. So there's a similar expression found elsewhere in the Bible, look not upon, that's used as an idiomatic device. And it doesn't mean that there's a negative quality being referred to, but it is a way of saying don't put great emphasis on this. So when King Saul, who was a king in Israel who had displeased God, was being removed, God said to the prophet Samuel, don't consider that he's tall and he looks like a mighty man, because I have rejected him. So the expression look not is not identifying a negative trait of embarrassment, but rather a factor that should not be considered. Many Bible scholars have come to the same conclusion. Dr. Michael Fox, who I studied with in Madison, wrote in his book on the Song of Songs, the Shulamite explains them to her girlfriends, the girls of Jerusalem, why she is swarthy. She's on the defensive, as if expecting them to look down on her. So these attitudes of looking down on dark-skinned people is something that it was common in those days. There were people with those viewpoints, and it's not something that the biblical text supports or recommends. And when we look at the entire context, the way in the euphoric terms that the beauty of the Shulamite is praised, there's certainly nothing negative being seen about her appearance. Your cheeks are comely with plaited wreaths, the boy tells her. Your neck with strings of jewels. Ah, you are beautiful, my darling. Ah, you are beautiful. All of you is beautiful. There is no blemish in you. So black but beautiful doesn't make sense in the context of Song of Songs. So what does the verse itself mean in context? The better translation would be, I am dark and lovely. My color is royal. And then she tells her girlfriends, don't disparage my suntan. So this seems to be the best contextual understanding of this abused verse. Another case where there is some disparaging of black skin, this is a whole story of Moses with his sister Miriam and brother Aaron, who was high priest in Israel. And Moses had several wives, among them a Cushite wife, an Ethiopian wife. And his brother and sister were talking against him because of his Cushite wife. And so because of this talk, God sends a curse to Miriam and gives her leprosy. Her skin turns leprously white. And then Moses, in turn, prays for her, and she's forgiven, and her skin is restored. But I think it's really interesting that the punishment for Miriam for having shown this biased attitude toward dark skin was that she was made white. Oh, you want to be white, honey? Okay, you can be as white as you want to be. And so I found that pretty humorous and ironic. So there are these cases where there were prejudices shown by figures in the Bible, whether they're the daughters of Jerusalem or in this case, Aaron and Miriam, but those attitudes are spoken against and definitely refuted in the biblical text, not supported. So a lot of this research I wrote up into a paper called Black and Beautiful Skin Color in the Biblical Song of Songs. You can find this online if you want to in the Bahá'í Library under my name and the title of the publication. It goes into more detail about how these verses have been misused and how they are translated and understood in a better context. So Black History Month is this month. This symbol happens to be from last year, where we had a 29-day campaign in our local interfaith network. And it's important that as we consider these spiritual lessons found in the holy texts, that we don't begin and end with words, that we have a practical application for our learning. One thing we do locally is we visit historic Black church once or twice during the month of February, build friendships, build relationship, very often have a chance to talk, sometimes to give a little sermon and share some of these thoughts from the scriptures about race, and to build friendships and really work in a practical way toward race unity. So to conclude, we're going to look at some choice verses on race unity found in all the holy books, in the Jewish scripture, in the Tanakh, in the Christian Bible, in the Holy Quran, and in the writings of the Bahá'í Faith. So universalism is demonstrated in the Torah and the blessing and promise that were made to Abraham. The Lord said to Abraham, I will make you into a great nation, I will bless you, and all people will be blessed through you. Though there's no indication here of any cursed people, all the people on earth are ultimately to be blessed in the divine purpose. Below you see a picture of the Torah being read. One of the sacred treatments of the Torah is that the Torah scroll itself is not touched, but the reader will use this little silver hand, or called a yad, to point to the text being read. Very common practice in synagogue. Another concept that shows that racial prejudice is out of place is the commandment given to the Israelites on the way they should teach strangers. When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not wrong him. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So this expression to love the stranger is something that's repeated many times, in fact, 36 times in the Torah. And so non-Jews and Jews were to be treated as if they were citizens with love and with a sense of their merit. A famous quote from the Psalms that celebrates race unity: how good and how pleasant it is for brothers and sisters to dwell together in unity, or to dwell together as one. Here's again a picture of a mixed racial congregation studying Torah together. In the Christian scripture, it also embraces the idea that every tribe, language, and people and nation can be blessed. In the book of Revelation, it shows all being gathered in together to worship the one God. The Quran, too, has statements that foster race unity. O mankind, indeed, we have created you from male and female and made you tribes and peoples, that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of God is the most righteous of you. So what makes someone noble is their conduct, their righteous acts, not their racial or family inheritance. And famously, in his last sermon, which is not part of the Quran, but another preserved document coming from Muhammad, he said, all mankind is from Adam and Eve. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, or a non-Arab has no superiority over an Arab. Also, a white has no superiority over a black, or a black has any superiority over white, except by piety and good action. The Arabian tribes were familiar with black-skinned people. It was a short boat ride, well, for our standards, but not too long a boat ride across the Red Sea to Africa, to Ethiopia. And Muslims actually fled to Ethiopia for protection when they were persecuted in Mecca. So they were very familiar with black-skinned people and welcomed into the early Islamic community. And concluding with well-known writings from Baha'u'llah, from the Hidden Words, O children of men, know ye not why we created you from the same dust, that no one should exalt himself over the other. And finally, the tabernacle of unity has been raised. Regard ye not one another as strangers. Ye are the fruits of one tree and the leaves of one branch.
Thanks, Ted. That was fascinating, and I'm sure we have a lot of comments. You might want to adjust your camera so that you're a little more centered.
I couldn't see myself in there.
I know that's the problem. I know. Okay. We had a good-sized audience, and I'm sure we'll get some questions from this. This is really a marvelous summary of race unity in all of these different traditions, and especially it's really helpful to hear the details about the Song of Songs, because that, of course, has been a verse that people have wondered about for quite a long time. And it hadn't occurred to me that it's one thing to talk about the Hamites, another thing to talk about the Canaanites, who are just basically the local folks that they took the land from. And of course, they're going to put down the local folks they took the land from. Many of whom ended up converting, most likely, to the religion of the Lord anyway. So
it was syncretistic, as you know. They combined their former practices with the worship of Yahweh for the whole period of the kings, and we have a lot of record of that in the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one thing I've always wondered about the word Tanakh with the KH sound at the end, but it's ketuvim. So where does the ch come from? Do you know?
Right. Okay. Well, there's some technicalities of Hebrew I can share with you. It's the same letter with or without a dot in it.
Uh-huh.
And the dot is used at the beginning of syllables to make the sound hard.
Uh-huh.
It's used in a phrase or an expression, something called the construct state, where it kind of flows with the preceding. It's softened. So Hebrew very much switches, a T and a TH. If you've heard Ashkenazi prayers in Hebrew, they actually pronounce a softened T as an S, as a sibilant, right? Like they say bias instead of bayit, or Shabbos instead of Shabbat.
Yeah, I've heard Shabbos. I've heard Shabbos.
The same spelling, just with or without a dot in it.
Ah, okay, that's interesting. It's rather like in Arabic, the H's can become T's at the end of words, and a few other shifts of that. So that's really interesting.
Exactly.
Huh, that's very interesting. Yeah, we don't have any comments.
It means the writings, and in that collection are the Psalms as the longest and the chief book, but there are many others that are other books that are in that, including the Proverbs, Kohelet or Ecclesiastes, which is a really famous kind of a skeptical treatise on the nature of life. Everything is striving after wind, and Solomon in this story, we don't know if it's really attributed to him, or it comes from him, but it's attributed to him. But he just says, I've done all these great things, I've built all these wonderful things, and I've had all these wives, and it's all just nothing.
Well, that's one of the marvelous things about the Tanakh, because it's got such a wide range of texts in it and wide range of positions. I mean, consider Job and all of the sort of skepticism that you see there, but ultimately the triumph but the whole question of what the purpose of evil is and everything, and of why do bad things happen to good people. So yeah, it's one of the remarkable things about the Tanakh, is that it really is a collection of diversity of positions on the sacred and of ethical issues. So it really is fascinating that way.
Do we have any questions from the audience yet?
Well, we've got one person who just said, can we get a copy of this talk to show to my community? Is it online somewhere? And of course, yes, we will have it online at the Koren True Center's YouTube channel. In fact, it's already there. And as soon as we finish talking here, it'll be processed. It'll be up right away. So you'll be able to find it there. It will be under live streams until I move it to the webinars section of it, but it'll be available there. Can you share your PowerPoint with everybody as well?
Sure. How would you like me to get it to you?
Send it to me as a PDF, and I'll stick it up on the web page for the webinar.
Okay, beautiful.
That's another.
And the paper is available online as well at Bahá'í Library if people want to dig a little deeper.
Yeah, that's very helpful. That's very helpful. Is there more that can be said about Moses's Cushite wife? What was her name? Do we have that information in the?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. There's been a lot of discussion about whether she was, really Cushite or from some other local tribe, because she was apparently in Arabia, or in the desert area where the Israelites were wandering. So was she actually from Ethiopia or another descendant of Cush? Whatever, there's a lot that we don't know about that ancient usage of languages. Cushite was definitely associated with Ethiopia later.
Mm-hmm. Well, people were crossing the Red Sea pretty easily in those days too. People went back and forth, so it could very well be that someone from Ethiopia was on the other side of the sea.
Right.
That certainly can happen.
Thor Heyerdahl proved that it was possible, right?
Yeah, well, that was an even longer trip.
Right.
That was an even
longer.
They
built a reed boat like they used in Egypt at the time, and they sailed across the Atlantic in it. Yeah. Of course, the Phoenicians settled in Carthage, in the Mediterranean, a good distance across the Mediterranean from where they came from, and they were able to navigate amazingly with the technology they had at the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was, I think, a marvelous presentation that way, because it'll be a good chance for people to consider sort of, another view of Black History Month from the point of view of the Old Testament. So that's
thank you.
Quite helpful.
If I could share with everybody my current research project, which is another book coming out, hopefully in the next few months. I wrote a book a few years ago called The Kinship of the Bible and the Quran, which is a survey of the similarities in theme in virtues, in historical narratives between the two texts. Many people are unfamiliar with how much similarity there is in the Quran, that the story of Adam and Eve, as we saw today, of the flood, of Abraham, of Moses crossing the Red Sea, of Joseph in Egypt, and the story of his contention with his brothers, all these things are in the Quran.
Yeah.
And the Quran even speaks of David and Goliath. So, of course, it talks about Christian topics too. Mary and is revered in the Quranic text, as well as the Torah and the Gospel being affirmed. Mm-hmm. But that book was written from an interfaith perspective without using any Baha'i references, and it was written for that interfaith audience. This follow-up book is called Baha'i Keys to Reconciling Jesus and Muhammad.
Oh, fantastic!
And it uses the Baha'i text to reconcile some of the things that have been considered historically theological differences between them, whether it's the crucifixion or the divinity of Christ or the sonship of Christ. Those topics that were really central to Christians, as we know Christianity today, that are rejected by the majority of Muslims. But there are good textual ways to resolve those differences, and the Baha'i Faith has the keys to many of those.
Fantastic. Now, Ann Hutchison says, thank you for this excellent summary and clarification of some of the ancient holy texts. I will certainly share this information and our ongoing sharing circle for a conversation on race in the Baha'i community in Colorado Springs and the Song of Songs with my lovely Black women friends. And she also says she's also share much of this information with a Zozo Zoom Unity Circle, which meets monthly to expedite the concepts of unity. So it sounds like this is going to be a very useful presentation for talking about unity of the oneness of humanity. So.
Very gratifying. I'm delighted. Please feel free to use it and spread it widely.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Well, it was an excellent presentation, and I think I probably should mention something about things that are coming up. In 2 weeks, I'm going to have Dr. Mujan Momen on, and he's going to be talking about the Afnan Library in the UK. This is a library that was created by the bequest of Hand of the Cause of God, Hassan Balyuzi. It has all of his books, and they've supplemented it since, and it's quite an impressive facility for doing Baha'i research. And that particular, it's basically going to be a center for Baha'i research and scholarship in the United Kingdom. So this is a very exciting development that's been ongoing for several years now. So I think that's pretty much it today from the Korin True Center for Baha'i Studies. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again at next time. Goodbye for now.
Thank you, Rob.
Bye-bye.